All right. You have now entered the agency. I'm your host, Agent Mbe, and I'm here with a fellow artist, art educator, mother, a watercolor specialist. This is Rowena Finn. We met in Norfolk at Norfolk Drawing Group, I believe, and then we just kind of just ran into each other throughout the art scene and back at Norfolk and got to know each other a little bit there. And then I think more recently, just at the end of last year during the holiday season, you seem to get really active about the arts and arts education and art perspectives. And it really, I guess that's how we got into this point of wanting to have this conversation. I thought it'd be really interesting to bring you on and talk about some of the things that you've been experiencing, your perspectives as an artist and as an Asian American artist. And how we can kind of relate to kind of our experiences as artists in minority groups. So thanks for coming on. Anything else you want to add? You can introduce yourself as well.
No, that was great. Thank you for having me.
Yeah.
Norfolk misses you.
Yeah.
You're such a great part of the arts community here, but you seem to be thriving where you are, so I can't help but be happy for you.
Yeah, it was a tough move, but luckily I kind of had some good foundations to be able to kind of make some steps to make some progress here and turn this first year into something that could last a while. So I'm definitely excited to have been here. And I have a show in July in Norfolk, so I'll be back at some point.
Oh, awesome!
Give it some work.
I'll make sure to be there.
Yeah, I'm excited about that. So this all came about, I would say, because of an article you posted from ArtNet, and I think I had read it too. Either before you posted it, or maybe I read the one that you had posted, but it was interesting seeing like the conversations that was happening on that thread. And like I said, I saw this kind of happening on your Instagram and on your Facebook in general. And I'm gonna kind of, I think I want to briefly bring up that article real quick, and I'll share my screen so I can do that. There you are. So it was an article on ArtNet. It was about self-taught artist Jamie Holmes. And it started off kind of about his kind of mentioned that he had never went to a museum before until he was over 30, and now people are buying his work. But it kind of further into the article, they start discussing kind of the relationship between collector or representation from museums and things, and that of minority groups, whether it's or the tiptoeing of exploiting versus supporting artists and minority groups.
Right.
And then it also, I think, go ahead.
Oh, no, I was going to say, there's always that feeling as the artist, like, do you take advantage of the fact that people are in a way exploiting you and just run with it because you can do some good with that? I mean, I feel it really struck me at the beginning when he said that he had been nervous about wanting to go into a museum, and he felt like, how do you dress? And when he finally goes in, he realizes people wear anything they want.
Yeah.
And then, there's so many things about this too, because, there's the whole thing about him being a self-taught artist and the people that his work has been able to bring in, and how good that is. So I'm really happy for that. But then there's also like you were saying, where do we draw the line on what's exploitation of, by collectors who still have the majority of the wealth, and who still get to say whose art is worthy of being purchased and put in museums and collected. And I mean, his work is good. And I really like the symbolism and especially for somebody that's self-taught. I feel like for somebody to kind of bring that imagery in and be self-taught, that, I mean, like the genius already existed there, which is kind of like one of the reasons why I've been really happy to be in education, because I was just having this conversation. I was listening to NPR yesterday, and they were doing this thing highlighting important people in the African American community and throughout American history, because of course it's February. And they talked about Marian Anderson singing on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial and how she gave the short speech before. And she said, genius like justice is colorblind. And I just love that, because I think the biggest tragedy right now in our country is that genius really does come from anywhere and everywhere, but because of this systemic racial bias that exists in pretty much every system, that prevents people from having opportunities. I mean, like we're really shooting ourselves in the foot.
Yeah, I think this country's had a hard time at like facing its systematic oppression of minority groups and other groups. And it kind of ties into what you brought up wanting to talk about as well, as far as like the model minority group. And it was interesting because I had never heard the term before, but it's something that I'm sure I've like thought about before. And thinking of how I think the way that you referenced it almost kind of flipped it from how it's usually used, because it almost often all the articles I was reading was about it always pinpointed Asian American groups and how that was like the group that, you know, they always reference and say, oh, these are successful minority groups and this is how you could be like them.
Yeah.
But then you were almost discussing or bringing up how it's almost the opposite in the arts, where at least here in the United States, African American art has been more prominent in recent years, and I guess you're trying to express that like Asian American art is less prominent in that regard, or has a slower progression of success in today's times. So it's really interesting to hear that kind of flip, because I had never really given that much thought, because I think when you're in your own minority group, your focus is generally on what your identity is, and you're like, all right, we're trying to deal with what our issue is, and you can easily, you know, be ignorant to how many other groups are vying for that same amount of, you know, respect and attention.
Yeah, and then it keeps us all feeling like we're supposed to be competing against each other, and we're not. But that's, I mean, like that's kind of historically what keeps white supremacy in power, is because, you know, they and it's not even just like minorities, it's just the poor and people who are broke and can't get ahead, you know, by keeping all of these different groups thinking that we're supposed to be fighting each other or competing with each other. It keeps us all weak. And yeah, so the thing about the model minority, I'll tell you, when all of that stuff with the coronavirus and Asian hate stuff started surfacing, and then like legislation got passed like that, to fight that. And, you know, I work with high school kids, and a lot of the Black kids in my school were asking me like, well, how'd you feel about that? And I said, I got to tell you, I was grateful, but I was pissed, because I felt like the fact that it was acted on that quickly, that to me was definitely a sign of that whole model minority crap. Because like, as an Asian who's always wanted to be an artist, but it wasn't supported in, you know, and broadly in the Filipino community and a lot of Asian cultures, it's not supported to want to be a fine artist. You know, when you don't fit the mold and you're, you know, you're on the outside, the whole model minority thing is really just like a slap in the face, because like the whole idea is, you know, like our parents and the generation before them came over here looking for a better life, working hard, but the whole idea was to keep your head down, do your work, don't cause a fuss. And part of that had to have grown out of what they were seeing happening with Black communities all over. You know, like they didn't want to be targeted, because there was still racism against Asians, but it just wasn't nearly like what the Black community faces. And then, you know, I've been listening to the audio version of Stamped from the Beginning by Ibram X. Kendi, and it really hit home, because he talked about how like the three arguments about race are the segregationists, the anti-racists, and the assimilationists. And I had never heard that word, and it really struck me, because I feel like that's a lot of what Asian Americans have done. We've, especially like Filipinos, because, we were conquered by the Spanish for like 400 years, and then conquered by the Americans for like another 50, and really, fought alongside Americans during World War II. So we really bought into the idea of the American dream.
Yeah.
But also like the culture and everything. And so like even growing up, I was probably a total assimilationist because I wasn't in touch with my culture at all. Um, and so like when I see how quickly legislation got passed, I was really pissed because I was sitting here like, this is exactly what the Black community has been fighting for generations, and you just gave it to us like nothing. And so it's just, and then I talked to this one guy who's very active in the Filipino community, and he's white and he's married to a Filipina. And he was basically saying like, the model minority argument is crap. Like we should just be happy and that we have that. And I was so angry. And I had some words with him trying to set him in his place, but he's like an older guy who probably doesn't listen to like what he perceives as a little Asian girl or whatever. And I was just like, well, you don't even have a seat at this table.
Wow. Yeah. That's really interesting. 'Cause I was looking at that through the in the arts, and how it was another article I was reading. I was kind of like just clicking through ArtNet articles, because I went from that one on Jamie Holmes, and there was one that referenced Kerry James Marshall and some of the kind of work he's done and his perspectives of like public institutions pretty much profiting off of work that he did for public artworks, where he might have gotten part of that 1% deal for the building of the institution, but then they're trying to flip it for 1,000%, and put it on the market. And he even got his work, one of his works, taken out of auction because of that. It was like, I don't support this. This doesn't make sense. Like, you're about to make $15 million, and I got paid $10,000 for this for the public, But that led into another article looking at how museums were collecting from it was based on African American artists, but then kind of broke into kind of minority groups as well. And it got me to thinking about how somebody might make I think there was an article about an artist that was participating in the Biennale, and he made a piece that was pretty kind of visceral, and very reflective of racism and kind of selection process of that. I think it was a video of Rodney King being beaten, and there was like buttons or tags that people could wear that said nobody. It was like nobody wants to be white or something like that, or nobody aspires to be white. And the people who were on the boards and things were all just like, oh, I hate it, it's bad, I don't like it. And how easily that could, an artist who chooses to do that it's like there's an easy excuse for the people who are voting or choosing these artists to say, oh, we don't want to have Black artists anymore because they're just going to make these complaints every time they make artwork. And that's kind of, I think that ties into that like assimilationist theory of like artists dumbing down their work to ensure that they get some recognition and keep the doors open, as opposed to making the artwork that they really feel is important and speaks to their experience. And you kind of fall into that cycle of, oh, if I make this one thing, or if I say this thing the wrong way, they're going to kind of write us all off again, and there's another 50 years we had to fight.
Right. Because I still, on top of that, all that, I still need to keep on the electricity and keep a roof over my head and be able to buy, some food. Yeah. And, it's funny because when I was thinking about everything that we wanted to talk about today, I was thinking about how, each person on earth has such a short time on earth. And like, what are you going to do with your time? And I'm sitting here thinking, because like, I hardly get to paint. Like by the time I'm done doing everything else, like with the teaching and all the organizations that I'm involved in and my family, I'm exhausted. I just want to go to bed. And I was like, oh God, it's already the end of February and I need to enter some shows, and I gotta finish the painting so I can get in these shows. And I thought, but the work I'm doing is really important. Like I next week, the National Art Education Association, they're going to have their annual conference, and they have you can either do it hybrid, live, or online.
Mm-hmm.
And I won a scholarship to attend it for their ED&I commission, which is awesome, because I feel like the whole equity, diversity, and inclusion, like that, I feel like that's really aligning with what I want to do. But then I thought, God, is my time here on earth to be a bridge builder and a door opener for other people? Or am I ever gonna get to walk through that door myself?
Yeah.
And so, like, when I think about all those arguments, like back during the civil rights movement, when, of course, everybody now loves Martin Luther King and acts like, oh, nobody would have hated him back then. And I'm like, wow, you need to open a book. And I think about, like, how people would keep telling him now's not the time. And, of course, everybody keeps saying, like, now's not the time. And it's like, why do you get to say when is a good time for me to have these opportunities to live my life to the fullest, to give my contribution to the fullest, because you're just not ready to deal with it?
Yeah.
Like, why do I have to, like, live my entire lifespan and see it just completely disappear and never be able to fully do everything that I want to do because of the color of my skin, or because of the fact that I'm a female, or whatever, because I'm, gay, or, like, whatever, all of these things that people aren't allowed to do when the genius is already there.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I was thinking that in terms of even how, like, artworks gets chosen to be in collections, because the last article that I was reading was, kind of talked a lot about that. Is, how does work get chosen to be in a large institution? And I worked at a major museum, and in the Chrysler Museum, and thinking of our contemporary curator was African American female, and so she brought in a lot of female artwork, a lot of African American artwork, and she kind of explored various cultures. But and looking at how many different identities that might interest that particular person, that might be where their focus is, and then easily how do people get out of this idea of what interests them? I remember reading and in part of that article, there was either a curator or a director that was recounting a conversation they had with a board member where they had their meeting about what they were going to, like, choose for artists, like maybe for their, like, next year of collecting. And one of the board members pulled them aside and was like, "Don't forget about the white guys." And I was just like, "Wow." It's like, and I could see, like, it's no surprise. Like, I could see it happening very easily.
Oh my God.
But to just imagine it, like, I was just like, I think I just actually just kind of went over the video that you said that you and your husband had watched of that I had with my friend. I just kind of went over a section of that was pretty much the same thing, where it was like, it has to be a time where, the more equality that exists, it kind of dwindles down those, kind of majority groups that have been existing in museums and those spaces. And it's high time that that recognition gets spread, further. Yeah. It's like, oh, don't forget about us. You're gonna forget about us, all these other groups. It's like, what do you think we've been facing for the past, generations? Like, what do you think we've been dealing with?
For real. It's so funny that you say that, because, we watched the halftime show, and of course, like, that was my thing, and I, my friends and I were all, like, eating it up and loving it and everything. Of course, on Facebook the next day, you see all these people who are like, worst halftime ever, blah, 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 blah. And, there's this guy I know who's white, and bless him, he does try, but sometimes he's just so on the wrong side. And he hated it, of course. And then, like, so I'm kind of following this whole conversation, and he goes, can we even talk about the elephant in the room, that there was only one white guy? And I was just like, and I mean,
wow.
And I mean, of all people too, I mean, it's not like, it was Eminem of all people, who's, like, been entrenched in the culture for decades. So I'm like, oh my God, like, I don't even know.
Yeah, we get caught up in this, like, the sense of the now, like, this is what's present, this is what I see. Everything that might have happened in years prior doesn't matter. We want it now and forever. It's like, well, like,
I know. And
People
I
forget.
don't know. It's,
You can go YouTube your favorite halftime show. It's not that big of a
I
deal,
know.
you know.
I know.
It's not that serious. Um, yeah, it's hilarious. What am I knowing? I had a couple of notes here. Successive art by. You mentioned also in your when we kind of discussed yesterday, you wanted to kind of talk about a conversation you had at the museum that kind of
Oh, yeah.
which is I'm definitely curious to hear about
Yes.
that.
Thank you. Yeah, so you used to work there, and I'm
Yeah.
I'm still pretty involved there, and I love that museum. And I have to say, like Kimberly Gannett, she really has done a fantastic job. You can just see the difference.
Mm-hmm.
But in the museum's favor of saying that too, I mean, like you can tell that this has been something that's been developed over years of trying to be like more culturally sensitive and more inclusive and stuff. So I definitely give them props. I think that they're
Yeah.
on the forefront of a lot of museums
Oh yeah.
in trying to have that conversation and bring those uncomfortable topics right front and center for people. So what was it, a few months ago, there was a, like every time they have an opening, they'll have like somebody come in and do like a lecture or whatever, or have a conversation. So that right now is the 50-year legacy.
Mm-hmm.
So it's really just pulling items from the collection and highlighting things. As it's a cool show. Not my favorite, of course, because like I really like all the stuff that they pull in from different artists. But anyway, it's a good show, and it really does give a lot of good information. So they had like the opening for members only.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm a member. Like, granted, I'm like baseline level. I'm not like,
Yeah.
gala
Yeah.
attending $1,000 a ticket kind of
Yeah.
member. But anyway, so they had this woman that runs I guess it's like a collection consulting firm who came in to talk about like just having like sort of a fireside chat about collecting. And I wanted to attend anyway, so I went. And when I was walking around, because they had like, the museum was open for members to go see the new exhibit. This was the night before it actually fully opened. And then they had like cocktails and stuff like that out on the patio.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I go and I look at the art, and then I go to the patio part, and there's probably like, I don't know, less than 100 people there, maybe like, I'm really bad at estimating, but it wasn't a lot of people.
Yeah.
But as I looked around, I realized that almost everybody was white and older. And I saw two women who were Asian apart from me, who were also older than me. And that was it.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that was it. And I just thought, that's interesting. And then everybody kind of made their way over to the auditorium for the fireside chat part. And once we were in there, I did spy another woman who was Black, and that was it. She was older than me too, but that was it. Like everybody else, there were a few younger people than me, but for the most part, it was like my age and up, and I'm like in my mid 40s. And so, like the whole discussion proceeded. She had like a slideshow where she was talking about like some of these really hot collectible artists. And I found it really interesting because the first two artists that she talked about were African-American artists. And she, so she had the slides up of their work and she introduced them as such. She said African-American artists. And then after that, like everybody else that she talked about was, I'm presuming white, because she just said that they were American artists. And it kind of struck me like, you're not saying like they're, German American or, French American or whatever. And there was no talk of like Asian Americans or anything, or Native Americans.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and of course, because like, and not to just say it frankly, I mean, like African-American art collecting is really hot right now among collectors, which goes back to the exploitation thing that, that you and I were talking about. And so, she was talking about like how, trying to make predictions about like what collectors are going to be wanting. And it really just rubbed me the wrong way. So the moment they opened it up to ask questions, like my hand just shot up and I said, how do you quantify ethnicity when you're collecting? Because you're introducing those artists as African American artists, even if their work literally, like on the face of it, has nothing to do with their Blackness. Some artists obviously do, like Jacob Lawrence, but then when you show somebody like Alma Thomas, all of a sudden, like, yes, of course her work is informed by her experiences, but on the face of it, I don't look at her work and say, oh, this is a Black artist,
right?
So, and then she was just kind of like like I kind of caught her flat-footed, and then like the person up there with her kind of helped navigate through that, and of course they didn't really answer my question, because I was basically like trying to get them to look at like you're talking about Black artists and you're also talking about them because they're Black, so does that mean like Asian artists are next, or are you going to go swing toward Native Americans? Like, where are you going to go? Because I mean, it's there, it's not being said, but it is part of the decision making.